YouTube live, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Right
we
now
are
we are on
also
YouTube.
trying tonight this new app called Clubhouse. Have you heard about Clubhouse?
I have not.
Somebody want to describe it while I put my failed earbuds away?
Go ahead, Thomas.
It is an app that lets you. I'm posting the live.
It's an Audible app. It's basically a virtual audio conference center. So people get in an audience and people speak and share ideas and people can raise their hand and ask questions. It's almost as though you're at like a convention where you're hearing keynote speakers and such. And we're broadcasting it through our cell phones right now as we're doing the radio show through Zoom on YouTube and about to be on the radio. It's kind of fun.
It's called Clubhouse?
Yeah, it's called Clubhouse. You have to have an Apple phone, apparently. I've just found that out as I was deciding to leave Apple and go back to Google and Samsung. And I lose Clubhouse to do that.
Oh, well, I have none of that. I have an Android and a PC laptop.
So you're not in the Clubhouse.
I am not.
Not in the club, Dr. Joe.
Yeah,
not in
not-
the community.
I'm not in the
Not in
club.
the community of Clubhouse.
Okay.
That's all right. I am barely in it myself.
You're in it big time.
I have 4 people that I've just pinged them.
Oh, how do you do that?
When you see that little, let me teach you.
Oh, I see it. There it is. Let's do it.
Let me teach you how to do it,
I don't have a lot of friends.
grandson. So if you see that little plus sign there, you can then press on it and then you push on the picture. So
And what's the advantage of using this Clubhouse?
I'm not sure yet, but I think it's sort of like you can have an almost like an audio webinar with people, and
Hey,
you can,
Thomas.
start chatting about grief and psychiatry and psychology, and just open it up to people, and then they come in and they listen, and sometimes they contribute, and then they can leave quietly if they want to. Typo on Clubhouse.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to cut you off. You were doing so well. Dr. Joe Shu.
The Dr. Joe shoe.
Oh, for God's sakes.
Could you change that? No wonder nobody's coming in.
Conversations.
I love the Dr. Shu show.
Cuomo says you never ever meant to offend anyone or hurt anyone.
It is a show with a lot of
anyone.
soul.
Ducking autocorrect.
So many ducks.
California have adopted.
But we've got it all laced up now.
Did you closed the room altogether?
It looks like it was the only way to do it.
I was just inviting people. Cool though. All right. So you pinging me in?
Yeah.
So how do people?
Ben, how many commercials? So Dorothy, just we're not usually this disorganized. This is a whole,
Okay.
a
Yes,
whole
we are.
new world of being. We're just trying this new thing. So when we first started doing YouTube Live or Facebook Live, it was hilarious as we were trying to figure that out. It was right at the beginning of the pandemic, because usually we're in studio. We're in studio live.
Yeah.
And we have not been in studio. It's a year, guys. It's a year.
Unbelievable.
Have a tradition is that after the show, we would go across the street to our local Chinese restaurant, Ming Dynasty. And we had a tradition where we would have one drink and sing one karaoke song. But you could never sing the same song twice. So, and it was really fun. We would just have fun and hang out, and that's all gone.
Yeah.
But, so what we usually do is we would invite people down, and if they were in studio, they would have to come over and sing a karaoke song.
Oh, wait, was that obligatory?
Sure.
But we never told people it's
degrees.
obligatory.
Sorry to interrupt, Doctor. We do have a, we can split this into two as usual if you'd like.
Friday.
Up to you, Ben.
I'm down with two. It's, I think it keeps the show moving.
Like the single
Sounds good.
digits near 15
Thank
to
you.
20 at
You're
best.
welcome.
Gusts,
30 seconds and coming up on it.
Friday
All right.
night.
Oh, Dave Will's here.
Down to 15 to
Dave
20
Will
degrees.
is here. Hello,
Saturday
Dave
will start
Will.
bitterly cold.
He can't talk.
Sunshine, a few
He's in
clouds.
the audience with
High
us.
32.
Dave, we're doing the
And
Dr.
a real
Joe show
cold
right
start,
now.
Some sun.
So we
Should
got
I
the
leave?
YouTube.
Should I leave
High
guests?
35. Will stay
And,
very dry, though.
Yeah.
High pressure will be
HD.
shifting offshore by
How's
early
that?
next week, and that'll bring a spring-like, milder trend.
Can they like raise their
Touching
hand or
60
whatever?
Degrees, especially away from coastal towns through the
Well,
middle
if they
of the
come in
week.
and start talking, it might
WATD, our meteorologist,
derail what
Rob
we're doing.
How can we make the world better?
All right.
By making
Going
ourselves
hot.
better.
What's up, Hickey?
The Dr. Joe Show explores how you can make positive personal
We're
change
doing a
by using
live
this groundbreaking
radio
and
show
highly
that's
effective
also on
I am
YouTube, but is
approach
now on-
to understand who we are
Clubhouse.
and why
Thanks
we
for
do what
joining
we
and being
do.
the beta test.
Your small
Dave
changes
Will,
can have
you might want to
big
meet Mike
effects.
Hickey. You guys-
Join
10
us
seconds
now
for the Dr. Joe Show with Mark Stiles of Stiles Law, Thomas McCoy, and your host, Dr. Joe Schrand.
Radio right there. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Dr. Joe Show.
Very nice, Mark. Very, very nice. So how's the week been for you?
Amazing.
Yeah?
Epic. Yeah, oh yeah.
It's an epic week. Why?
It's been an amazing week because I got a little closer to heaven this week.
How is that?
I got up into the mountains. See
it's
them
wonderful.
behind me?
I do. Those are.
Wait, where am I? I'm not sure where I am. Am
you're
I in the mountains or am I at the beach?
This is one of the wonderful things about having our backgrounds.
How's the
And
beach?
Tom, how's your week been?
Well, it's become a slightly more chaotic as of tonight. For
Why is
those
that?
for those who are watching on YouTube Live, I am quite the sight. I appear quite foolish. I have 2 sets of headphones in only 2 years.
You're doing great
Wow.
though, Thomas.
You are. And why do you have 2 sets of headphones tonight?
Well, we're trying to integrate this new platform called Clubhouse into the show.
Now, what is Clubhouse?
Well, it seems to follow, and mind you, we're all pioneers here. It follows the legacy of platforms like Discord or TeamSpeak or Ventrilo, these lesser known platforms that are similar to, as Mark said before the show, it's like a convention hall where everyone can join and speak, whenever they have the conch. This is the much more simplified version where it's on your phone. You find a room anywhere in the world. People are hosting on a certain topic, say brain science or rocket science or science, and they'll just join the room with potentially hundreds of other people with a keynote speaker.
Huh. And that's what we're doing right now. And is there a name for our room?
Yes, it is on Clubhouse right now. It's the Dr. Joe Show.
The Dr. Joe Show.
And you'll find our own Dr. Joe right there in the room.
Right, and there I am, and there you can see the I am logo, and we are just doing it. And I love the fact that we are pioneers, especially since you have so many earbuds for your pioneers.
That was good. That was. I'll
So
give you
that
one.
may actually make the cut, wouldn't you say, Thomas?
Yeah.
What cut is this?
Oh, buddy, you are in trouble now.
You see, we've piled up quite the backlog for people who are new to the Dr. Joe Show, and maybe they want the choicest cuts to really be sold on it.
The choicest cuts.
Yes. So I'm thinking,
Prime.
what if we had a compilation of your dad jokes
Oh,
or of your
hey.
segues?
I think this is delightful. I tell you, something happened the other day. I'd like to share it with you. I was chatting with this person, and they had just things were miserable for them. It was like one bad thing had happened after the other, one tragedy, one bad decision, but it was all like fate had conspired. And I said to this guy, so it sounds like Murphy's Law. He says, what's that? I said, have you heard of Murphy's Law? He says, what's that? I said, it's when one bad thing happens after another, one bad thing after another. He says, oh my goodness. He says, have you heard of Cole's Law? I said, what's that? He said, it's thinly sliced cabbage.
Good.
Oh, Joe, maybe I'm your best audience.
Thank you. Yeah.
That was fantastic.
Oh, I love that.
So that compilation,
Thank you.
Thomas, that's going to be found on our YouTube channel, right? With the folks that are watching it streaming on YouTube right now.
That's right. People watching on YouTube on this very channel. Dr. Joseph Schran, the Dr. Joe Show.
The Dr. Joe Show YouTube channel. So we could expect to see some compilations of, is it compilations or compilations?
It's a compilation. Actually,
What if you want to say compilations? Because I want to
totally.
If you were ultra fancy, I suppose.
It's fine. You can
with your aluminium.
Yes.
Which one? Say it again. Come on.
Aluminium.
But that's elemental. So, sorry.
What context?
I'm okay. So anyway, so that's part of what we're talking about tonight, at least for the first section here, is about the new technology, is about new chat rooms. It's about this new way of connecting. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this new way of connecting is happening during COVID, because we are so starved for any social connection that I think it sounds like a great thing. The person who introduced it to me was this woman, Hisla Bates. And she's got her own great sort of podcast and everything. And she's a child psychiatrist who I actually helped train when she was working with me at MGH McLean many years ago. It's gone on to do a lot of great things. So chat room, come and join us in Clubhouse and check it out. And hopefully we'll be able to do this not just on the Dr. Joe Show nights, right? But we can just have sort of informal Clubhouse chats about things. One of the things that I'm posting on right now in Psychology Today is about anger, because, you know, my new book has just come out. It's actually a second printing of one of my award-winning books called Outsmarting Anger. And I was really honored that I got an email from Psychology Today saying that they called it that it's elevated, or they'd basically given me a raise, and they had put one of my blogs in the essential read category for anger. And I think that the title was, anger is just an emotion. There's nothing wrong with anger. It's what you do with it that matters. So I was really quite honored that they thought it was an essential read. It's kind of cool.
That's very cool.
And then the other thing that I was posting, and we're starting to get some traction, is a small little blog series called Words Matter. And maybe we can just talk about this for a moment. It's about the difference in certain words. So this one was chore versus contribution. So I suggest to parents that you have contributions that your children are going to be making in the house instead of chores. So if they empty the dishwasher, that's a contribution. If it's a chore, people can become angry and resentful because there's a power differential. I'm told to do something as opposed to being asked to contribute. And every time you contribute, you increase your value. And we all know that that's what everybody wants. We just want to feel valued by somebody else. So what do you guys think about that sort of subtle difference between a chore and a contribution?
That's a massive difference. Because like at past jobs, there was fewer things worse than being in the middle of doing something and then being told to do it. It made me want to stop.
Yeah.
Just like,
right.
Who are you?
Right. And again, it has to do with that sense of power. And remember, there the first 3 steps in Outsmarting Anger. You recognize rage, envision envy, and sense suspicion. And the envy happens when we think somebody has more than us, and that can include power. Mark, you've got kids. What do you think about the idea between a chore and a contribution?
I think it's brilliant. I mean, the reality of it is we're doing this every day in business, right? So you're thinking, okay, how is what I'm going to say be received by this other person, whether it's a team member that you're working with, or it's a client, or it's, somebody adverse to what your client's looking to do. Those words are so vitally important. There's a few words that I've taken out of my vocabulary over the last few years. Should and just.
Should and just. So why those
just.
two?
Well, should, I don't want anyone shoulding on me. So I'm not going to should on anybody else.
I hope people recognize the spelling of this. Go on.
But because if you think about it, and every time I'm putting it in a text and I'm like, wow, I can't find another way to say this, I pause and I wait and I said, you know what? There is another way to say this, simply by removing the word should. Yep. It's similar to chore. Now, just is very different. The reason I took just out of my vocabulary was it was a sales training that I was doing with some of my team members, and you just left Clubhouse, Dr. Joe.
Did I? What happened?
You just quietly left. Leave quietly. Dr. Joe just bailed on us.
I didn't mean to do that.
He bailed on his own show on
I
Clubhouse.
do like that's the only option to leave is leave quietly.
I thought I'm no. You know what I just did? I'm muted.
Well, you left, but you're back.
Here I am.
So you want to hear the reason why I don't use the word just anymore?
Yes.
Because it's weak. Think about all of the emails you received, and it's some salesperson or somebody who's trying to connect with you. I just wanted to check in. That's all you wanted to do. So I have eliminated it. And it's really easy to do. As you start to type it, you're like, there's a different way to say this, and it's more assertive.
Well, I think that those are terrific changes. Words matter. So I will not just do this next part, and it's not something that I should do, but what I really am going to ask is for our sponsors to contribute and to continue to contribute. It's not a chore for them, I hope. But I want us all to be able to contribute to our sponsors as well. So Ben, why don't we take our first commercial break, and we'll be right back with our guest on the Dr. Joe Show.
Are you worried about your drinking? Or is someone else worried about?
All right.
Well, I'm going from the beach to I'm going to go back to the mountains.
So Dorothy, that was thank you so much for listening in. I appreciate your laughing at the really bad joke.
No, it wasn't a bad joke. Those are the only kinds of jokes I can get. So my husband says.
That's great. I tell you, that one, I just giggle over that one every time.
I love it. Listen, you guys, it's going to be very hard to go from this wonderfully exuberant and funny and comic interacting and talking about grief.
No, you'd be surprised.
No. You'd be surprised.
You can turn it on and turn it off pretty quick.
Okay.
Really
like a faucet, right?
Oh yeah. We're going to tap right into this faucet.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that. Was that a bit of a drippy joke? It was.
Pardon?
So I didn't mean to be a drip. So
Joe,
so what's gonna happen?
Joe, you can't do those kinds of jokes with me because I can't stop laughing.
Then you are welcome back on our show anytime.
Okay.
It's going to be great. So what's going to happen is we're going to come back after this commercial break. Then we'll have an entire half hour before our second commercial break. And then we're going to continue to chat with you, Dorothy, and we're going to be wrapping up. And towards the end of the show, I will be asking you to comment on the 2 truths of the I am.
Yeah, the ones that you sent me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Small changes have big effects. What small change can you recommend to our listeners? And you control no one but influence everyone. What kind of influence do you want to be, Dr. Holinger? So we'll be getting to those last couple of minutes. And then if you want, we can stay on for a couple more minutes afterwards.
Will you tell some jokes?
As long as people don't give me grief about it.
Oh, good joke. That is
Thank
good.
you.
You're sharp, man. You are sharp.
Yeah, it's really bad.
And reputation. At Styles Law, we have a mediation department ready to help you find that middle without saving that time and money. But you must plan ahead.
The Styles Law legal team offers consultations by phone or Zoom. Call 781-319-1900. 781-319-1900. On the web at styles-law.com.
It's always better to be proactive so you are not forced to be reactive.
And we are back with the Dr. Joe Show. And we are talking about the community of Clubhouse and YouTube and where all the influencers are, Thomas. All the influencers seem to be on YouTube. So we might as well have the influencer's influencer. When you say that Dr. Joe would be the influencer's influencer?
Oh my gosh.
What do you think?
Would be, to be an influencer of influencers?
Yeah.
You know, it sounds like quite a responsibility. Not quite as much as having an influenza, though. I would not want that. And that gets me into our next topic, actually, because we actually were talking a little bit about this. We were talking about Clubhouse, and we're talking about COVID and the isolation and the need that we have to be with each other. But COVID has also brought some real tragedy, some real things that we are allowed to be sad about. And I'm so delighted to have our next guest here on the Dr. Joe Show. Tom, can you introduce our guest, please?
Absolutely. She's a very appropriate guest. She was an academic psychologist on the faculty of Harvard Medical School for more than 23 years. She's a graduate of Brown University and author of The Anatomy of Grief. Welcome, Dorothy Hollinger.
Welcome,
Hello.
Dorothy.
Hello, Joe. Hello, Tom. Hello, Mark.
Hello. So, you know, we got a chance to talk a little bit about grief in another show during COVID, but I'm fascinated by this, The Anatomy of Grief. Can you tell us about the book? How did you come up with the title, The Anatomy of Grief?
What will I start with first? The anatomy, well, obviously people know what grief is, but why we called it anatomy is I talk about the structure of grief throughout the book in very many different ways. And what it's about what happens to the human self. And what I mean by when grief comes into your life, when you lose a loved one. And what I mean by that is the brain gets grief stricken. You can't think clearly. It's hard to remember things. The heart is hurting. The metaphorical heart, people will say, I have a hole in my heart. My heart hurts. Also biologically, I mean, there's something that actually can happen. It's very rare, but it's called broken heart syndrome, which is also called, the formal name, the medical name is Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. And the third part of this is how the body hurts. The body just, yearns for the loved one. And this is grief. And grief is also, if you would look at how you could define it, well, simply put, it's the intense sorrow that we feel after a loved one dies. But broadly put, if you think about it, Darwin said grief is universal, and it is. It cuts across species, and it's also timeless. It can go back. Well, I talk about this in the book. I write about it. It can go back millions and millions of years, and there's an unpredictability to grief. Let me back up just a minute. This happens to everyone at some point of their life. And one doesn't know how long it's going to last. It has its own timetable for everyone, actually. And grief belongs to the griever. No one can tell the bereaved, it's about time. Don't you think it's about time that you just moved on? That's just not fair, and it's not appropriate. The griever owns their own grief. And another part of this is that grief, which is a crisis, actually, when somebody dies, this can create growth. This can help with a transformation. All of us change. And in the depth of all this sorrow, there can be great change. And, if you think about hardship or something difficult, just think about learning a subject. You've got a new textbook, a new course you're into, and it looks awful. How can I do this? But you do, and what you're learning is how to tolerate discomfort. And think of somebody who's a runner or a tennis player. I mean, they don't say, I'm not going to do this because it hurts too much. Well, it's the same in some ways for grief. To be able to endure it, to experience it, to allow it, that's what helps it quiet. And it does quiet eventually. But part of its unpredictability is that it can erupt at any time. Amazingly, for example, I tell the example of somebody going to a movie and seeing one of the actors that kind of reminds her or him of the father that has died. And, well, I'll make it the woman. And she comes outside, and all of a sudden she simply bursts into tears. And not knowing where did this come from, but sitting down and realizing that, that man really reminded me of my father. And you know what? It's going to be the anniversary of his death next week. And of course, I'm more sensitive to it. So this is part of what grief is. And another characteristic of it is, it depends on the relationship the bereaved had with the loved one. And it also depends on the bereaved, what their attachment history was. Was it a secure attachment? Were they able to tolerate separations, absences from their mom or the caretaker? That all contributes to what kind of grief someone can feel. And this can segue into what I'd like to talk about, which is the forms of grief. In my second chapter in The Anatomy of Grief, I read about the different forms that grief can take. And I see grief like this, not in 5 stages, which don't work at all.
The Kubler-Ross thing doesn't work, the 5 stages?
Well, oh no. Really? Where this came from with her was from her classic book that she wrote in 1969 on death and dying.
Right.
This is where stage theory and 5 stages came from. And what she did with this is explain, and she did a lot of research. It's a wonderful and classic book. These were the emotional changes that somebody who's terminally ill faces before they're about to die. Well, you can't deny that death has happened. This is one of the stages of dying. You can't really bargain for, as people who were terminally ill, as this is one of the stages, bargaining for their life. Well, you can't bargain that death doesn't happen, because it did. And you can just go through all of these and they just don't make sense with grief. But it just came, it was in the American consciousness, well, since 1969 when she wrote that book. And it was as though it just naturally fell into thinking about grief, but it's become a pop culture idea, really. It simply doesn't work. And I can't say that strongly enough.
Interesting. I mean, because how can you bargain once you've already lost someone?
Right. Exactly. And, I see, if I can I think it might be helpful and interesting to talk about the forms of grief that I talk about in the book. I really list about, 16 or almost 20 of them.
Wow.
But I have to make clear, Joe, that these are not diagnostic disorders like in DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that the American Psychiatric Association publishes. And that one was 2013. No.
Right. And I am totally fine with that because I have we talked about words matter before.
Absolutely.
I don't use the word disorder at all. Disorder separates people into a group that's ordered, a group that isn't. It's stigma. But tell us about these different types of grief that human beings can experience. These forms.
Well, and some of them you already know, the public already knows. Anticipatory grief. This is the grief that we experience when one is under the threat of death. A loved one is about to die or has a terminal illness or a kind of chronic, debilitating, finally terminal illness like Parkinson's. Well, we've all felt this anticipatory grief during COVID. We've all, as a nation, felt that in the sense of how many more people are going to die. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, that death toll is going down. But that's one of the forms of grief, anticipatory, and many of my patients have experienced that.
Dorothy, let me just chime in there.
Sure.
The death toll is not going down. The rate is going down, but the death toll will never go down.
Well, true. That's true. That was Joe, that word was wrong.
but I think that this is why your book is so important right now, because we have a nation that is grieving.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, tell me more.
Well, just to pick up on that, I wrote an op-ed piece, February 22nd. It was published in The Hill, Washington, D.C. publication. Great. And it came out the afternoon of President Biden's second memorial over, memorializing over 500 million people who had died of COVID. So, and in this, the name of it is, it's the collective grief we must face. And
I think it's 500,000.
What did I say?
500 million. That would be.
Joe, I have to tell you, my zeros have always been kind of mixed up.
That's all right. It's all right.
Thank you.
But go on.
Okay, so 500 million. What did I say again?
That's what you said. It's 500,000.
Say that again.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So why didn't I say 500,000?
Good. Well,
okay, thank you. Anyway, another form of grief is ambiguous grief. Pauline Boss.
Can we go back to the other one first?
Which one? Anticipatory?
Yeah. Is there a guilt component to that feeling, that emotion?
There could be. Yeah. That's a wonderful question, Mark. And the guilt would be attached to, when a caretaker or relative is taking care of somebody who is dying, and it goes on and on and on, and it can be really traumatic. And they feel, when is this going to be over? When are they going to die? And then they feel hideously, hideously guilty about thinking that. It's perfectly normal. There's exhaustion that you feel after you've been doing this over and over, taking care of the loved one. And some of the times, given whatever they have in terms of an illness, there can be EMTs coming to the house because there's a sense, okay, I think they're dying now, and they call 911, and it doesn't happen, and that can happen repeatedly. One of my patients had such a response to hearing sirens. It took a long time for her after her husband died, because there were so many times that the EMTs came to the house and took him to the hospital. So yes, one can feel guilt about this. And it's important to understand, I think, for anyone who's grieving, that it's okay to have thought that. And another, actually this there's just so much to talk about. But one of the things that has been happening during COVID that I've been so strongly respond to is what our frontline workers have been going through. I mean, they're the heroes in many ways of this COVID, this pandemic that we're living in and have lived through. But what they've gone through, being with patients who are dying and can't have their loved ones with them because of COVID, and COVID patients die alone, just maybe saying a virtual goodbye on an iPhone or an iPad. This is awful. And those doctors, nurses, other people, clinicians who are in the hospital, they've gone through this over and over and over, and they've experienced their own trauma. And a colleague of mine has written about this, along with colleagues of hers, calling this vicarious trauma. And I think that's a very, very apt term for what they're experiencing. And, you know, we hope that they've been able to debrief with coworkers on the unit, with friends, with family. And, you know, a lot of them could be helped by psychotherapy, but not everybody. It just depends how one deals with that kind of experience. Does that answer your question, Mark? I went way off.
No, absolutely. The whole guilt component was answered brilliantly.
Oh, thank you. Does it make up for the zeros that I got screwed up on?
No,
well, if I had $1 for every time I did that, I'd have
what? A million?
500 million.
500 million.
A Googleplex.
A Googleplex.
Nice. That's a million, I believe.
Oh,
it's a million zeros. See, I messed that up too.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Dorothy, I think you gave a lot of people a sense of relief that it's perfectly normal to feel that way at the end of a long, long journey.
Yeah. You know, another form of grief that we've been all experiencing during COVID is ambiguous grief. I mean, how this was first come about as a term by Pauline Boss is this is experienced when a loved one goes missing and is considered dead, that they had died, they presumed dead. And there's no closure for us because there's no body to bury. Well, that's happened in many ways for a lot of people, not for everyone, but for a lot, because there hasn't been able to be traditional funerals. We haven't been able to come together in public to hold each other, to cry with each other, to just be with each other publicly to grieve. And also when you go to a wake or a sitting shiva or at a burial, there's a way to say goodbye. That's the last time on earth that you will be with the loved one, although now deceased. And it's an opportunity to say goodbye. We haven't been able to do that during COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just been, you know, talk about words. You run out of words to be able to describe this, you know?
But it speaks, doesn't it, to this connection that we have with each other. And how each one of these examples you've given, it's really about how desperate human beings are, how critical connection is for us.
Oh, yeah.
So how do those go together? Our need for connection, the loss of connection, and grief?
Well, in the traditional funeral services, you were connected. And that, you know, that begins for the newly bereaved, that begins their journey with grief. But they begin it with being attached, being connected to people, people who have come to the funeral home to pay their respects, to say, I'm so sorry. However, when that ends, meaning the people that you're with during that first time and the after time or the after death time, that goes away. And that finally, that newly bereaved who becomes the bereaved, the griever, faces life alone.
Yeah.
And that's one of the ways also that is so different. Grief is so different than looking at it from 5 stages, because facing death is profoundly different than facing life without the loved one for the bereaved. And that's part of that. I mean, how that unfolds itself depends on the griever, on the connections they have, the support they have, the family they have. It's, the whole thing is just so individual. It's remarkable and wonderful, and yet you really can't put any kind of a template on it. And I think that's one of the important issues here. You can't squeeze it into a box or a formula. And Joe, you mentioned a little while ago, how did you say it? Words? What were you saying about words? Because I wanted
words
to add.
Matter. Words
Yes,
matter.
Absolutely. And this is another point that I stress in the book, is to talk about your grief, to be able to talk about it. Because talking about negative emotions changes processing in the brain. It goes from the feeling brain, the amygdala, up to the thinking brain, which is in the prefrontal cortex. And it doesn't stop the negative emotion, but with grief, it will help the person tolerate it a little better. And for anybody with negative emotions, I mean, there's been some very nice research showing this. So I'm a big proponent of words, because that's what we do, right?
So I'm curious about this, because now that you've brought in the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, which we talk about a lot. In the
do you?
Oh, yeah. We talk about these things a lot. I know that there are these different words that we use for the different types of grief. But what is the biology? Because that must be relatively universal. Do you talk about that, the biology of grief? What's actually happening in our bodies?
Well, it's a good question. And I think one of the forms of grief that is probably the most difficult form of grief, it's called complicated grief. And this is a very intense kind of grief that is actually relentless. The bereaved can't really let go of the intensity of what they're feeling. I'll get to the brain in a minute. The intensity of what they're feeling from the day the loved one died. Intrusive thoughts happen. They go back to mementos of the loved one, for example, photos of them, or a husband can't take his wife's clothes out of the closet. And there's a study that was done some years ago by Mary Frances O'Connor. It was an Fmri study that looked a study of complicated grief in women. There was a group of women with complicated grief. And
so let me just interrupt for a minute. So fMRI, for our listeners.
Oh yes,
functional
sorry.
Magnetic resonance imaging. So we can actually take pictures of a brain as it's working and moving.
Right.
Go ahead.
And it's measure of blood flow, which is an indirect measure of neuronal activity. So this was an fMRI study of women with complicated grief. That was one group, and a group of women with non-complicated grief. Well, the women with complicated grief, when they were shown photos of their loved ones, interspersed with photos, neutral ones, and the photos were paired with words from the individual women's descriptions of their loved one. So in other words, there was a loved one and a description that person used to say that these were some of the words that I can't remember exactly how it went, but anyway, let me get to the main point.
It's almost like they have like tag words.
Well, I think what they were doing is they did an interview with them, and they took words from the interview. That's what they did.
Right. That's how they would describe their loved one.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
So anyway, what happened with fMRI is that a part of the brain that's called the nucleus accumbens was activated in the women with complicated grief. And this is a part of the brain, as you know, Joe, that is involved with satisfaction, like when you're hungry, you eat, or when you are thirsty, you drink. But it's also the reward part of the brain. So what happens, we think, with women or anyone with complicated grief is there's such a satisfaction in going back to the memory, but the real distinct memory and mementos of the loved one, and with the intrusive thoughts that happen, that brain part of the brain keeps getting activated. But that's one of the few studies that really looks at something that's, it's not a one-to-one correspondence, obviously, but there's a very strong association with what the women were actually diagnosed with, because they do diagnose complicated grief. It's the only one that they do. And, you know, I don't know if you know, Joe, but in this last DSM-5, they took it out in terms of a, quote, disorder,
right,
and as a condition to look at in the future.
Right,
Complex bereavement.
Yeah, I mean, to say that somebody who's grieving is disordered is,
I know,
never sat well.
Of course not.
But I think also the folks that I've worked with, sometimes they keep the clothes in the closet. They keep these things, and the complicated grief is just a way of not coming to terms with what has really happened.
Absolutely. They can't accept the death.
Right. So one of the things that I will say to folks is, if anybody tells you to get over it, just tell them to go to hell. I said, tell them to go to hell, because you'll never get over it, but you must come to terms with it.
Right.
Because it is part of who you are.
Exactly. And what the relationship was like between you and the loved one who died. Yeah. And that's
so I just want to say, and we don't want to grieve too much right now, because we do have a relationship with our loved ones, but they are not dead. They are our sponsors. And so what I want to do is take a commercial break so that we can celebrate our sponsors. Mark, Tom, you're okay with that? Ben, we'll take a break. We'll be right back.
That was a brute force segue.
Sorry.
No worries.
Listen, I am going to get, Joe, I'm going to get screwed up all my life with these goddamn zeros. Anyway.
We just have to take a break at 8:45. So that's what I had to just sort of push that in. So we have.
I can't hear you now.
What happened? You can't hear me? Uh-oh. Tom, what happened? Dorothy, you still there? Are you there?
Sounds like she's clipping in and out.
Yeah,
Well, it does sound like something's clipping in and out. Well, we've got a little minute.
I am.
Oh,
okay.
I think you're back.
I think you're back.
Voice is.
Uh-oh.
Can you?
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
What's going? You want to call back in from another phone?
It's
Got Wi-Fi issues.
Do you have a landline?
Yeah.
Why don't you call back from your?
What's your number?
781-837.
Wait. I'm sorry. 781 what?
781-837-4900.
78.
You're calling into the radio station?
Yes, if you call into the radio station, we'll let Ben know that you're going to call in.
Let me call you back.
781-837-4900.
Oh my God, good luck, Ben. I hope you're ready.
Okay.
Have we ever done that?
Yeah, of course we have. We've done that before.
Who?
We've had somebody call through.
I think we've done it with in studio, or when we did it in studio, we just say screw it and have them call in.
Yeah.
But how are we going to patch them through to Zoom? Through Ben's Zoom?
Probably.
So does somebody tell?
Hi, I'm Mark Stiles of Stiles Law. No one wants
Hi,
to accidentally create chaos by not planning.
Hi, it's
At
Dorothy
Styles Law, we
Holinger.
offer
It's
estate
Dorothy
planning,
Holinger.
which
Fine,
reduces
yeah.
stress on
My
your loved
internet.
ones during a health
So everyone
crisis.
on the radio is
Family
hearing this.
disputes over assets can be avoided, but you must plan ahead.
The Styles Law Legal Team offers consultations by
Okay,
phone
good.
or Zoom. Call 781-319-1900. 781-319-1900. On the web at styles-law.com.
It's always better to be proactive.
We have
not
Dorothy
forced
on
to
the
be
phone line, okay?
reactive. And we are back with the Dr. Joe Show and Dorothy talking about grief. Good.
So you with us, Dorothy?
I am. I'm here. I might.
Well,
My internet.
You have to
He's in
turn
the
off-
spirit world.
Yeah, he's in the spirit world. Only use one phone. So if you're on
He's
computer,
crossed over.
They're
turn
here.
off all other things.
She's crossed over to the
There you
other
go.
side.
Oh,
God.
There we go.
wait a minute.
This has been one of the best shows ever.
us? Dorothy, can you hear us?
I think Dorothy might have to turn the Zoom up if it's not already, or someone needs to turn a speaker down.
Oh, God. Wait a minute.
Yeah, I bet it's her Zoom still that's kicking it. Although she's not on here on Zoom anymore.
That's right. I'll mute her.
ATD,
Yeah,
are
here
you
we go.
loving this? This
Let's
is
try it.
technology. This is adaptation. This is
That's
the
right.
COVID. This is what we're doing. We got Zoom, we got YouTube, we got Clubhouse, we got ATD, and now we have a caller in on ATD.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes,
There we go.
we
Yes.
But it's an echo. It's an
It
echo.
is.
Oh, there is still an echo here.
Come on, Ben. Come on, Ben. This is your time.
Delete the echo, Ben.
Oh, yeah, let me just go ahead and delete the echo. That sounds nice
Scrub
and
it.
easy, right?
Just
Okay.
erase it.
All
Scrub
right,
it
let's
out.
try it again.
Zoom and enhance.
So, Dorothy, are you there?
Yeah, I shut off my computer so I wouldn't.
Perfect.
Much
We
better.
can hear you great. So,
Yeah.
so there.
You're welcome.
So we do not need
Thank
to
you, Ben.
mourn any of this. So we've got a few minutes left. As people come to terms with grief,
Yes.
what can they expect? How can they actually do this? I mean, we know that there's the grief of the loss of a loved one, and you know, we could talk for a long time about whether it's a spouse, whether it's a sibling, whether, God forbid, it's a child.
Right.
But how do we come to terms with these things?
Well, I think one of the most important ways of doing that is to, as I said before, and it sounds so easy, but of course it's not, to be able to accept the grief, not to be overwhelmed and frightened by what you're feeling, and to be able to, as I mentioned earlier, put your grief into words as much as you can. You know, people don't really want to talk about grief, but given that we're in the pandemic and we've lived this way for a year, they're more likely to be able to listen. But this is one of the ways. And another way is, as I wrote in my op-ed piece, to do something that maybe, I call it art, but it can be anything. Journal writing, from journal writing, or just reading something and you write down a snippet of what you're reading and put it into a book. And to be able to realize that the more you think about and feel this grief, think about your loved one, the closer you're getting to basically memorializing them in your memory. And I talk about this as grief, as if you can think of it as lead, beginning to become burnished and turn into gold, into the joy of remembering your loved one. Delight. I mean, it's bittersweet, of course, and there are tears, but you can cry grieving, but also smiling and remembering the loved one just in so many very different ways. And I don't know if I have time to go into it, but I did write about different kinds of tears Do I have time?
Yeah, please. Please, we have a few minutes. Please, we'd love to hear it.
Well, there are three kinds of tears. One is just the basic tears that we have, the basal tears that lubricate our eyes. And then another kind is reactive tears, when you're cutting up an onion or something and you begin to tear. But then there are emotional tears. And these are the tears that have one of the chemicals in these tears, the emotional tears, is leucine and kephalin, which is related to endorphins. And this is what usually makes us feel better after we cry. And in the book, I put in images of from a book that was called The Topography of Tears by Lynn Fisher, which was an amazing book. It was just a book of photomicrographs. She took tears from different, and this was that she mentions strongly, this is not a study, evidence-based study by any means, but she would take tears from different emotions and put them on slides, cover slip them and put them under her microscope, and then take a photograph of it. And there were different patterns of tears for different emotions. And so I took some of them, like tears of grief or tears of letting go or tears of attachment. It was really, her book is extraordinary. And so I illustrated some of what I was talking about in that particular chapter. And do I have time to just quickly talk about the book as a whole?
Sure, please.
Okay. Well, the book is divided into three different sections plus an epilogue. And the first section is Grief Described. And in that first chapter, I talk about the evolutionary origins of grief. And don't be surprised because I go back to the dinosaurs. Anybody who reads the book. Anyways, the second chapter is the forms of grief that we've been talking about. The third is the language of grief and how language for the newly bereaved changes. It's no longer, oh yes, you can call my husband da-da-da-da-da, or my brother is going to meet you at this restaurant, because the tense now is past tense. My brother.
Interesting.
I can't meet you. And just the different words that are used, like widow or widower, bereft. Language itself changes for the bereaved. And then the second part of the book is the Physiology of Grief, which is the grief-stricken brain, one chapter, the breaking heart, another chapter, and the body hurting, a third chapter. But this third section of the book is the lost loved ones, and I concentrate on the family, and each chapter is devoted, one is devoted to mother, another to father, to child, to sibling, I think I say brothers and sisters, and the last one to life's partner, spouse, a significant other. And the epilogue, I call bittersweet alchemy. And I use that word that is another way of saying how crisis can create growth and change. Grief can alchemize into joy. Always, qualifying that with bittersweet. But you do begin to remember the loved one just chuckling sometimes and thinking, oh, I remember that, or something you do, a song that you hear. Anyway, that's the book. And
I think it's, how can people get the book?
Oh, well, it's everywhere right now. Any bookstore, Amazon. My website is dorothypholinger.com, and Holinger is with one L. Yale Press still has the book. Any number of bookstores, I think you can just look up the book. It's interesting enough, in Chicago, there's a bookstore called Seminary Co-op, and apparently it's the world's largest, as they say, bookstore of university press books. And they picked The Anatomy of Grief as one of their notable books.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
Nice.
So, Doc, let me ask you, in the last couple of minutes, the IM as you remember, we're all doing the best we can. And it's been interesting because we're talking about the 4 domains right here, the biological domain, the home, the social, and the IC. Because the domains interconnect, small changes have big effects. What small change can you recommend to our listeners in terms of grief?
Oh, in terms of grief?
Well, in general, what small change can you recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, what I was thinking about was to smile more, to be aware of trying to smile. That really does change how you're feeling. And another one, as you were talking about words, to be aware of your tone of voice with your words, because research has been done that if the tone of voice, the emotion that you're expressing, doesn't match the words that you're saying, people listen to the tone of voice, to the emotion.
So true. The other rule, you control no one, you influence everyone. Dr. Holinger, what kind of influence are you hoping to be?
Well, I do hope the book will have an influence on many, many people. I hope it will help them and help them understand how they don't have to be afraid of grief. Grief is the price we pay for love. It's the other side of love. It's as intense as the love you had for that person who died.
That is the most important lesson. You grieve in proportion to love.
Yes.
Folks, thank you so much for being here tonight. Everybody, we'll see you next week in the Dr. Joe Show. Thank Dorothy.
Oh, you're welcome.
Great show, guys.
Thank you,
Benny. Nice job.
WATD FM Marsh.
All right. So, Dorothy,
nope.
No, she's on the radio, remember?
Oh, I forgot. Boy, this has been like one thing after the other. You know what? I can call her.
It's okay.
Should we get her on the phone?
I'm going to,
All right. You know what?
I'm going to get going.
Do you want to keep going on YouTube Live and I'll call her, or we'll say goodbye and I'll chat with you guys next week?
I'm gonna get going. Yeah.
All right. And then remember, I want to talk with you guys about that special show I want to do. We'll talk about it later. Everybody in YouTube,